All right, welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about counting by mass. So our goal here is to use something called a mass ratio to determine the amount of an item in a large sample. So for example, we want to try and determine the number of grains of rice in a large bag of rice. So if we take a look at a huge bag of rice like this is a 2-pound bag of rice you can buy at Costco. And I'll be able to make a prediction. How many grains do you think are in this 20-pound bag of rice? Sorry, 20 pounds, not two. It's a big bag of rice. It would take a long time to count out all of those grains of rice, right? So we are going to come up with a strategy to help us figure this out using math. And looking back here to introduction, so it's easy to count small amounts of big items such as apples or bananas. So if you have a bunch of bananas, you can probably easily count how many bananas are in that bunch. But it's a lot trickier to count tiny objects like grains of rice or sugar. So you're not going to sit down and count out all the grains of rice in this 20-pound bag, or if you did, that would just take forever. And atoms fall in that second category of things that are really small. So atoms are so small we can't even see them, let alone count them. So we need a different way of figuring out how many atoms are in a sample besides counting them out one by one. So this idea of mass ratios is something that's going to be really helpful in our study of atoms when we try and quantify things and count how much we have. So we're going to use mass ratios, and we're going to use some examples with, in this lesson, we're using some examples with like real life objects like grains of rice and things that we can kind of see. And then we are going to take this idea later and apply it to atoms, which are also real things, but we just can't see them. So we're going to start with things we can see. So in this first problem, we're trying to figure out how many grains of rice are in this bag of rice. This is I think it's a 2-pound bag of rice you might buy at the store. It weighs 907 grams here if you look at the label. And what I did here is I went into school and I counted out 30 grains of rice from this bag. And I weighed them. And it turns out that 30 grains of rice weighs 0.56 grams. And what this gives us a relationship between number of grains and the mass. And we're going to be able to use this relationship to figure out how many grains are in a 907 gram bag. And there's different ways of showing this work mathematically, and they're all good as long as you are showing your work and labeling units by your work. So I'll show you an example of how you might go about doing this, and you might have a different way, and I want to see what it is you're doing, but just make sure you're showing your work and labeling those units. So you see this relationship here, 30 grains is 0.56 grams. This relationship is something that we can write as a fraction, and this is something that we will find, again, helpful as we go on and do this kind of work with atoms. And when we write as a fraction, something's on the top and something's on the bottom, so we've got kind of two options of how we could write this fraction. So I'm going to write them both down. Okay, and how might we find this helpful? Well, you can kind of set up a math problem like this as if they're equivalent ratios. That might be something that you remember talking about in maybe math class. So what I'm saying here is I'm taking this right here and I'm writing them out as two fractions. So I'm trying to figure out how many grains are in 907 grams, and what I know is that there are 30 grains, that every 30 grains of rice weighs 0.56 grams. So I have two equivalent ratios. They're both grains divided by grams. You see I set those up that way. It's important to pay attention to the units here to make sure they're kind of set up the right way. And then I want to rearrange and solve for my unknown. And again, here's where you might have different ways you look at this type of problem. Maybe you look at that and you think cross multiply. Maybe you just kind of automatically kind of see how to rearrange it. I'll try and show you what it is you want to do. So you want to have it set up so that it's grains by itself on the left. So I want to get rid of the 907. So if I'm dividing by 907, I want to get rid of it. I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 907 grams. So I end up with this relationship. The number of grains is 30 grains times 907 grams. Notice how my numbers still have units by them, divided by 0.56 grams. So every number you write down should have a unit by it, no matter how you're kind of showing your work mathematically. Okay. So, and when we do this, when we pay attention to units, we should notice we've got grams divided by grams. So that means those grams cancel out, and what you're left with is grains. This is something called dimensional analysis, where we are using units to kind of figure out what the setup is and what math we should do. So focusing on units is something we're going to continue to do, and we'll talk about how we can use our units to solve problems more in the next lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug this in our calculator. So it is 30 times 907 divided by 0.56. So it's around 48,589 grains of rice are in this bag right here. So it's a lot. We wouldn't want to count those out one by one, right? All right, let's go and look at a few more examples. So I'm just going to use the same setup here to figure out how many kernels are in this bag of popcorn. So what we see over here, I measured, and 10 kernels weigh 1.57 grams, and we're trying to figure out how many kernels are in a 907 gram bag. So popcorn is also commonly sold in these 2-pound bags there. And we can write a ratio. So we can write out a mass ratio, which is a fraction, which might look like this. So we know that 10 kernels is 1.57 grams. And something you could do too at this point, if you're interested, you could do 10 divided by 1.57. You could solve for this, and you could write it as, oh, there's 6.37 kernels per gram. You could write it out this way as well if you want to simplify it. Okay, and then let's go down here and figure out how many kernels are in one bag of popcorn. So I want to figure out how many kernels are in this one bag of popcorn that weighs 907 grams. I know that 10 kernels weigh 1.57 grams. So to solve, I'm going to multiply both sides by 907, and I end up with the number of kernels is 10 kernels, I'm just going to use K for short, times 907 grams divided by 1.57 grams. Notice how it's grams divided by grams, so those cancel out, so the units that we're left with are kernels. So you always want to double check that your units worked out to make sure you put the right numbers on the top or the bottom. So then we do 10 times 907 divided by 1.57 would be 5,777. Okay, another way you can go about doing this using this version right here is you might say, well, I have a 907 gram bag, and I know there are 6.37 kernels per gram. So you could set it up that way, and you will end up with the same answer. It's the same mathematically, it's just a different way of showing your work. And they're both good because they're both showing your work, they're including units. Yeah, so there's a variety of ways in which you might set this up. Let's look over one more. So again, we've got, this time we're looking at macaroni. So I don't know how many macaroni are in this box of macaroni. Macaroni is sold in a 1-pound box, it looks like, so that's 453 grams. And we know that 10 macaroni weigh 2.46 grams. So I'm going to do a quicker setup here. So I want to figure out how much macaroni is in a 453 gram box. I know that there's 10 macaroni per every 2.46 grams. So I can rearrange 453. And again, you might be able to kind of visualize this in one step using your, what you know about cross multiplying, etc. But this is 10 macaroni times 453 grams. I'll write this out as some times just to make sure. Okay, and then divided by 2.46 grams. So grams cancels out, and you will solve for your amount of macaroni. So it is 10 times 453 divided by 2.46 gives you 1,841 macaroni. So these are some examples of how you would use these mass ratios to count a large number of small objects. And we're going to use this again later on with atoms.